Just because you say you care about those things and you propose a solution in the name of caring about those things doesn't eliminate the possibility that you could make that thing worse.
Yes.
And people lack the humility to turn that around on themselves and say, okay, I care about this. I genuinely do. So that must mean that everything like rainbows just fly out of my ass when I talk. Like it could be that I, with good intentions, I could be causing the problem to exacerbate. And I think right now that's another thing that's just really missing from the conversation. Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Coralosophy Podcast. My name is Chris Muntz and this is episode 82. Are merit-based standards racist? With Angel Eduardo. Angel is a good friend of mine and now a good friend of the show in his second appearance on the show. And he's also the recent author of a Newsweek article called Why Calling Merit Racist Erases People of Color. One of the raging debates today in education centers around the ways in which we can expand access to the fruits of high-quality education to more students. And that is a wonderful debate to have. It's an important debate. However, a troubling strain of that song to me is the tendency to take the easy path towards equality. Attempts to include by excluding things. Headlines abound about school districts removing or lowering testing standards or gifted programs being eliminated, citing the lack of equitable outcomes. In the music world, we talk about eliminating blind auditions or auditions altogether. And listen, there are tons of fair criticisms of standardized tests or audition processes or the ways that we screen students, for example. But those are problems that could be addressed by doing the hard work, which is to simply do what it takes to make a better, fairer, but still rigorous test. Where is that conversation happening? I don't see it. So what if our focus was, how do I raise more people to the bar, rather than implying, without actually saying, that we need to lower the bar or remove it? So I call this taking the easy way out because it absolves the institutions, and even worse, the politicians that oversee the budgets of these institutions, of doing the hard work of finding and solving the true barriers of access, allowing students to benefit from these programs. Canceling the program is simply easier, leading to an appearance of equality. It's just equality on paper, though. And it makes the politician look good, but it makes no one actually better off. If a program is serving some kids, that means it's doing someone some good. By taking it away, whose life are we improving? So Angel and I really dig deep into this, centering around the article that he wrote, but many more of his observations, of course, that you can't fit into one of those four-minute read news articles. So I hope you'll stick around and listen to this conversation. And I know that it is a little bit heterodox, but I hope you give it a chance and hear us out all the way to the end. A good portion of the behind-the-scenes support comes from the Patreon page for the Coralosophy Podcast. Doing the show is a lot of work. It costs a lot of money, advertising, getting the word out, making sure that there is always content available for you is not cheap and it's not free. And there are some folks out there in this audience who recognize that. And they see that there is value in their lives from listening to this show. And there is no better way to interact with one person helping another person who helps them. Like, my goodness, that's the golden rule. So on Patreon, you have the opportunity to do that. If this show is valuable for you, you can jump on over there for as little as $3 a month. There are even higher tiers where you can become a producer. You can check in with me for consultancy if you would like to. There's swag to pick up. There's a private podcast feed, all kinds of cool stuff over there. The producers from the Patreon page, that's patreon.com/Coralosophy, are Vasquez Academy of Music, John Warner, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Thanks a lot, you guys. All right, everyone. I am back with Angel Eduardo, a second appearance on the Coralosophy Podcast. And Angel and I are going to discuss something that I think is rarely discussed, which is how do we parse out the concepts of merit from the myth or the legend of a meritocratic society, which are, of course, two different things. And Angel wrote a great article about this, so I thought I'd have Angel back on the show to discuss it. Angel, welcome.
Hey, man. Good to see you again.
All right. So, first thing I want to draw everyone's attention, of course, this will be in the show notes, is there was a Newsweek article that you wrote. I have it pulled up right here. The exact title of it is Why Calling Merit Racist Erases People of Color. And of course, I've since learned from you, as we've been corresponding quite a bit in the last few months since you appeared on the show first, that you don't get to pick your titles for articles. Is that how the biz works?
Yeah, generally speaking, the title is up to the editor, and there are a bunch of considerations for that. You know, they want to get exposure, they want to get clicks, and all that sort of stuff. That's part of their job.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll usually pick titles that I normally wouldn't, but they also get clicks and views that I normally wouldn't.
Right.
So,
Right. So how do you feel about this title for this article?
um, I actually think it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Generally speaking, I've shifted in my perspective a little bit since I wrote that, just in terms of how I refer to myself and also others. I don't really want to play into the whole, people of color thing or black people or white people thing. So I use scare quotes if I have to for the sake of clarity, just to divorce myself at least 1 degree from the concepts of these things. But it's part of the conversation. It's part of the way that you know we our society is structured. So you have to talk about this stuff. But I
Mm-hmm.
just want to talk about it in a way that's more clearly indicating that these are concepts and not realities.
Mm-hmm.
The whole concept of race. I know that you're with me on this. The whole Barbara and Karen Fields thing about racecraft and how we kind of we make race real in the way that we think and talk about it and express ourselves and identify ourselves. And so I'm trying to avoid that. But yeah, apart from that small nitpick, or at least apart from that small change since I wrote that piece, it's been a few months. I think it's one of the less incendiary ones. It just basically says what I'm saying.
Right.
So
Right. And by the way, strong recommendation. I will also put a link in my show notes to the book Racecraft by Barbara and Karen Fields, probably the best book on race that you could read, in my opinion.
yeah.
And definitely better than a D'Angelo book or a Kendi book.
Yeah, totally different stratosphere.
It's
And
got actual scholarship in it.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I won't lie, it was hard for me to read. I had to reread passages many
Hmm.
times. I started the book over a couple of times. I got to the end of the first chapter and was like, I don't know what the hell's going on here. So it takes a little bit to kind of tune into the way that they speak. It's Barbara and Karen Fields. So they co-wrote it, and it's kind of a compilation of other articles they've written and some speeches they've given and stuff like that. So it's not exactly an easy read, but it's an important one for sure.
Yeah. All right. So, kind of driving us back to the topic now, with the article that you wrote, and I like that you started out with that little quibble about the way we talk about race, because yes, you were right. We both share that concern, and we talk about that a lot. But you are in this article playing into or speaking into a reality that I will say, and you feel free to disagree, that I think is actually done unintentionally by people when they speak about the way race and merit connect. You've pointed out a few examples in the article about people who directly, explicitly say that attaching admissions to a school or grading policies or test results or any of those types of things to a concept of merit is just racist. And so we have been put in this situation where uh, academics, people who are in charge of education in a lot of spheres, are making the claim essentially that there is a race component to whether or not someone can achieve XYZ on a test or in a class. And your argument is, hey, whoa, back up. That tells me that because of the color of my skin, I have some different capacity than other people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it was the Newsweek piece was prompted by that a video that was going around at the time, of the San Francisco Board of Education commissioner. I think it's now former commissioner, Allison Collins. and she was doing an interview, and she was talking about, these issues. And San Francisco is a particular hotbed for this sort of stuff. There's a lot of, tension right now about school admissions and all that sort of stuff. But she basically said, when we talk about meritocracy, and especially meritocracy based on standardized testing, those are racist systems, right? And it made me think, because I get where she's coming from, at least partly, right? There is a kind of myth, and I haven't read the book, The Tyranny of Merit, but that's kind of where it's coming from as well. Is just this idea of the idea that we live in this perfect meritocracy, and I guess we should define it, but is an illusion, because there are many assumptions being made about the way that structures work and the way that people can engage with those structures. And what's on the other end of the finish line in terms of success in any particular endeavor, right? The stakes are set in a particular way, and the norms are a particular way, and this idea that we're all just kind of running a race and it's totally fair, that the gun went off, we started running, and whoever gets to the finish line gets to the finish line. That's kind of the idea of a meritocracy that people have in their heads.
And that is
right?
kind of the right wing version of the myth.
Yeah.
In our country, in the U.S. anyway, that's a very political right way of explaining something. If that person wasn't successful, it's just because they didn't work hard enough and they didn't make good choices. And of course, I think the reality is more nuanced than that. In that, do people fail sometimes because they make idiotic choices in their life? Yeah, of course. But then it's also, that is not a simple enough an explanation for a societal trend.
Right. But yeah, so it comes from a couple of different directions. I guess the left and the right have different kind of, their dials are tweaked differently, right? And they kind of both get it wrong in those kind of manifestations of it. But generally speaking, the idea is we live in a meritocracy where hard work is the currency, and if you put in the hard work, you will succeed. And that's true to an extent, but I think that people need to examine that idea further, right? Because now we're getting into, we're still talking about meritocracy, this idea that this is the system we're working in, right? And it's kind of a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of point of view, right? And there's a lot wrong with that metaphor. It's actually funny because that metaphor came about initially to describe an actually literally impossible task, because you physically cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's just the physics don't work.
Yeah.
But then it kind of it shifted in meaning. The concept creep kind of went to where we are now talking about this is just getting by on your own efforts, right? And that's merit. Merit is you're rewarded for your efforts. You're rewarded for your particular skill or aptitude in a particular thing. And it's important to preserve that, but it's also important to recognize that where people get their aptitude, right? Where people get their tenacity, where people get their capacity for hard work, right? It's not everyone is in equal measure on those particular attributes, right? Not everyone has the same talents, right? We can say maybe everyone has a talent, or everyone has something that they're particularly, good at or passionate about, and they can devote their energy to it and do it a little bit better than the average person maybe, right? But what that thing is matters. What that thing is may or may not have an effect on their ability to prosper and succeed, right? If you're an incredible painter in 2021, it's going to be harder for you to, succeed and get a kind of, regular middle-class lifestyle. Like, I've got a house, I've got a car, I've got a family, and I'm supporting the entire thing myself with my painting, right? Because we don't live in a world where painting is the number one consumed piece of art or media, right?
Right.
Maybe 300, 400 years ago, different story. But now, if you're a coder, if you're really good at that, that's a whole other situation for you, right? You can be a millionaire before you're 40, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's possible to do that. That's just because of the way that society is structured. So society values things differently. It rewards things differently. It's valenced differently for different skills. We need surgeons, right? And we love musicians. But if I had to choose between like having the greatest cellist in the world perform for me or having the greatest brain surgeon operate on my head, it's always going to be the brain surgeon, right? I kind of need that in order to enjoy anything.
Mm-hmm.
So there are all these different things that we're trying to calibrate and balance. And I think we start to get lost when we recognize that as a scaled system, there are many problems to the whole merit thing. And one of the solutions that someone like Allison Collins is trying to get at, which is I think is an inadvertent bad, it's an inadvertent negative, is we're gonna remove the concept of merit altogether. So we're just gonna give everyone a medal as though they won the race, and we're just gonna say, now everything's fair, right? So standardized testing, we're just gonna get rid of that because certain groups are not performing as well, and so what we want to do is get rid of the need to perform well,
Right.
and boom, problem solved.
Yeah.
And that,
In the music world, that's get rid of auditions, or make or blind auditions are not fair even, because then you might not have enough boxes ticked of the categories that you're trying to find for the production or whatever it is.
right,
And so I think earlier you mentioned the idea that the left and the right kind of have their own myths about this, and they both get it wrong. Essentially, what I think happens on the other side, on the left, is that they do what you just finally got to there, which was that because the meritocracy system is not perfect, the solution must be to eliminate the concept of merit.
right,
And in reality, I think the way I think of this is that merit, because the meritocracy system is not perfect, we need merit even more.
yeah,
Which is that and to kind of take it back to your article too, where if the problem is in your mind, if you've got this vision of the problem, which is that not enough fill in the blank demographic people are being admitted into a space or to a school or being considered successful, to me the question to ask is, well, why is that happening?
right,
Not let's eliminate the ways of determining what's going on. It's kind of the opposite problem. What are the barriers for that group of people, and how can we possibly eliminate them? So to me, I like this line of thinking, because as a teacher, as an educator, in my experience, that's how I've always approached my classroom, which is that if I've got a kid who is not achieving for whatever reason, my assumption is that this kid I always assume this, that the kid wants to do well, and if they're not, they just don't know how. Whether it be they haven't been socialized, they haven't been held accountable at home, they don't have the physical, or I guess their hierarchy of needs met in some way. And what can I, as the teacher, do to help that? And it seems like the erasure of merit from the equation does the opposite of that, because you're essentially telling a young person that you don't have the capacity to do well at this. We don't say that
right.
explicitly, but that is the message that they get, and that's what I'm concerned
Yeah.
about.
Well, actually, some people do say it explicitly.
True.
They just kind of try to skew it positively. So
Mm-hmm.
there another video going around of people saying, uh, we, as in African Americans, we don't do it this way. We do it the other way. Like we're all about context, and we feel things out, and we're more intuitive. We don't do the whole Western. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the effect of the statement: is we don't do the whole Western white, logical thinking, rational thing. We don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. We're more intuitive. So we have to shift the way that we are taught, and we have to shift the expectations. We have to find other ways of knowing, and blah blah blah. And you know, I think one way that it's gotten away with is that it's spoken about in generalities. It's zoomed away from the individual. But when you think about the individual, when you think about an individual who falls into that category, which I do, right? I fall into their category, depending on how they want to divide it. What you're telling me is I shouldn't expect to perform well on a standardized test. I shouldn't expect myself to be able to follow rational lines of thinking as well as this dude whose ancestors happened to come from that patch of land hundreds of years ago. That's crazy. You don't know me. You have no idea what my capacity is, right? And you're just assuming based on these immutable characteristics and these concepts that are nonsense to begin with, right? But getting back to what you mentioned a minute ago, I think they do ask the question of why is this happening? Why is this group not performing as well? I think they do ask the question, but I think they just have a ready-made answer. Oh, the answer clearly is racism. The answer clearly is some system that is oppressing this group, and it cannot possibly be anything else because this is the binary that it's kind of a trap, whether people know that they're doing it or not, but it's kind of a trap. They go, either you're saying that this group of people is genetically inferior, or the system is oppressing them and keeping them from prospering. Those are the only two options. And I'm like, no, they're not. There are plenty of options in between that, right? Of course, nobody's genetically inferior to anybody. That's insane, right? But people do have different capacities. People do have different talents. And, some people are going to be exceptionally good at math, and other people are going to be exceptionally good at writing or singing or whatever, right? Some people are going to be exceptionally athletic. These are just traits that get randomly distributed from people. And yes, there are systems and structures that, at least historically, at the very least, historically, have put people at a disadvantage. That's obviously going to play a part as well. But attitude plays a part, upbringing plays a part, environment plays a part. All of that stuff plays a part. Another thing that I get in trouble for is this whole thing of when growing up, by being a kind of bookish person, I was called white. That was a thing that was white, is reading books and, speaking rather than talking. Like I say speak, they say talk, right? There's a division there between myself and people that I would be lumped into a group with. There are differences there. And I was called white for not adhering to their conception of what I was supposed to be because of my group category, right?
Right.
And it's a similar thing. That's going to have an effect as well, right? That's going to have an effect. If your peer group is mocking you for having certain traits or for having certain behaviors, that's a deterrent, so that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think part of the problem is that they have a ready-made answer to the question and they don't want to get into the details and the complexity of the actual answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. If racism is listed on your little worksheet, metaphorically, that you're trying to solve the problem as one of many possible causes to the problem, then I'm fully on board.
Right.
But the world we live in is just infinitely complex to the point that our brains actually are not large enough to even comprehend the amount of possible inputs that go into everyday occurrences. And so the idea, just based on that knowledge, the belief that any one factor could be the thing that is causing all of this, to the point where we don't even need to explore or discuss or interrogate other possible causes, is I try so hard to stay polite, but that's laughable to me.
Well, it's even worse. I mean, it's harming children, it's harming students, it's harming these people who need help and they need support because they're disadvantaged, because they have been struggling with situations that other people don't have to struggle with. That means they need more help. That means they need more attention. And we're kind of dismissing that whole spiel by just saying, it's racism. So all we have to do is blame a race and blame this system, and boom, everything's fine. And then we'll remove the standard. And now all these kids don't have to worry about meeting the standard. And so expectations for them intellectually go down, and everything suffers as a result of that.
Yeah. Well, and there's a I want to phrase this maybe like a contradictory binary happening on this topic as well, which is that it's about race on one side of the binary, but it's not about race on the other side, which is that it's about culture. Right. And those actually are contradictory in the sense that uh, a skin color doesn't convey a culture. It might it might indicate a likelihood of a culture. It might have like indicate some increased likelihood or decreased likelihood of having certain cultural aspects, but it really can't be about both.
Right.
It's we're thinking about it kind of like a bimodal distribution. And the reason I bring that up is because, again, as a teacher, I if we're going to buy the side of the binary that is, it's, black kids learn a certain way, or kids from Mexico learn a certain way, or whatever. Essentially, I'm going to be taught as a teacher, and this, I do feel like this happens, to look at my kids and make judgments about them before I've even gotten to know them, about
Right.
how they will learn.
Right.
And of course, we hear a lot about this cultural competency or cultural fluency in education, where we should be culturally responsive, right? Which I'm great with that concept, as long as we are keeping it about culture. Now, the problem is you can't know what a kid's culture is until you've gotten to know that kid.
Right.
And so for me, my entire concern about this whole topic is that it pulls so far away from the individual. In our concept, it's like, it's fine if you want to show me in a teacher PD meeting or something, a bunch of data on likelihood of certain demographic groups to have this or this or this challenge. I'm great with that knowledge. I think we should know that stuff,
Sure.
as long as somebody in the meeting says and makes it super clear that these are just averages. Keep
Right.
in mind that your kids are not averages. Your kids are individual human beings,
Right.
and you have to get to know them individually, to know what their capacities are, to know what their challenges are, to know what their interests are, all those things. And I think there is the assumption. So let's say if you're on the you're listening to this right now, and you're fully somebody who buys into the diversity, equity, inclusion, the language that is used in those spaces. I think maybe what I'm describing right now of paying attention to the individual kid, going to use your concept of star manning them, that side of it, which is maybe that is so obvious to them that they don't feel the need to say it. And
Mhm.
I've had some people say that to me before, like, well, we don't talk about that because, well, of course, we would meet our students in the classroom and get to know them and care about them individually. And I think most teachers do. But to me, it's not so obvious, in that you do have to say it. Like, you have to take that next step when you're presenting demographic information about groups of people, and make it clear, especially when it filters into these things filter into the brains of 13 and 14-year-old adolescents too. And
Yeah.
they are not going to see this as obvious. They're going to see, I've been taught how black people are, or I've been taught how white people are, and they're not going to, unless someone teaches them to. But remember, these are averages. Treat each person with individual dignity. Then that's not going to be inherent to them because they're teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that that's true and that that's how they feel and that's what they mean. But the thing is that that definitely is getting lost. It's
Mm-hmm.
getting lost implicitly because it's not being spoken about, and we do make these generalizations. And it's so funny because you describing that, that's that sort of thing of, oh, this particular group of people is going to learn a different way, you know and implicit in that is we should have these expectations for this group, we should have these expectations for that group. That sounds really familiar, and it's funny because it sounds exactly like the thing that we were struggling so hard to get away from 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's language that was coming from the the most despicable point of view that we can imagine. And now it's coming from the apparent opposition to that despicable point of view, but it's the same sort of message. It's telling people that, oh, I can look at you for 1 second, I can know what group you belong to, which is already false, but I can have some degree of accuracy and put you into the right group. And then I can make all these generalizations about you
Mm-hmm.
and assume that they're true. So you're erasing individuals, first of all. Uh, and you're reinforcing stereotypes, you're reinforcing all of the things that I thought we were trying to fight our way out of, right? But then there's also, when you scale these ideas to the level of policies and protocol for schools, and just how we approach people, right? You have to generalize there. And if your generalization is this group of people is not good at standardized tests, that's going to create a policy proposal of let's get rid of standardized tests because we don't want to be racist.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're screwed. Now we have not taking standardized tests. There's that other school where they just eliminated all these academic standards, and they framed it as this is going to be so good for the Asian and Latinx and Black and Indigenous and like basic literally everyone except for one very particular group was
Mm-hmm.
listed, and it's going to be so great for them. Isn't it great? We just removed all these standards, and I'm like, that's crazy. How could you think that that's a helpful thing? Imagine thinking that's an anti-racist thing to say. Is these kids aren't meeting the standard, and so what we're going to do instead of helping them is remove them. We'll just remove the standard. We'll take the finish line. We'll just put it right where they're standing.
Yeah.
And cool, race is over. Like that's not going to work.
Right. And earlier I mentioned that it is because we don't live in a perfectly fair meritocratic system, we need merit even more. And this kind of reminds me of a good example of that. Let's say, again, because I'm so focused on individual kids, let's say I've got a kid who is living in this unfair world, but maybe this in my music classroom, for example, but maybe this kid is brilliantly talented, has no other advantages going for him in life. Okay. And maybe it's a Black kid. In other words, I know I'm going to send this kid out into the world that isn't fair, and a world that you're going to have to make a name for yourself in some way to have a successful life. But let's say hypothetically, we've erased all concepts of merit. So what I've done is I've taken that tool, like the one thing this kid had going for him, which is maybe a brilliant musical mind and a brilliant musical talent, that if somehow he could show meritocratically at the college level, for example, and then I could get this kid a full ride scholarship.
Right.
But in a world that doesn't recognize merit anymore, now that kid's got nothing. That kid has nothing left because I can't trust that world to give him a fair shake. So that's where the balance of this, that I find your article to be so interesting, is because the title again, you've erased that theoretical kid from my classroom from having a potential to break through to, because essentially without any way for merit to be recognized, the only way we would have left of determining success is political pull. It's like you would have to have somebody decide at a stratospheric level who gets to be successful. And call me cynical, but I don't trust that either.
Well, it's just practically speaking a bad way to go, because the thing is that when you remove something like that, there's the kind of more generalized issues that we were talking about a minute ago, but then there's the individual issue. How does that kid feel? Think about that. Think about how this kid feels when he's told, "Oh, that's not for you. This isn't this sort of thing is not for you. This whole logic and rationality and punctuality, that's not for you because of your skin color, because of your perceived identity group. That's not for you." So again, very familiar sounding sentiment, right? It's not tinged nefariously, but neither was it most of the time before. Like I keep thinking back to in Malcolm X's autobiography, he talks about this moment where he was in a class, and he was the only Black kid in his class, and he was very smart, and he thought, you know what, I'd like to be a lawyer, and he told his teacher that, and his teacher said, listen, that's not going to happen, right? Like that's no job for a boop, right? And he was trying to be compassionate. I can imagine this teacher being, listen, I don't want you to waste your time, right? Maybe you should be a carpenter. You're good with your hands. You should be a carpenter. I can very easily believe that this guy was trying to help Malcolm out by telling him this. Like, listen, let me spare you because I know that it's not going to happen, right? For a variety of reasons, it's not going to happen to you. And we're kind of saying the same thing. How is a kid supposed to feel? Like that completely derailed Malcolm's life for the next 10, 15 years. Who knows what would have happened if he had been encouraged instead, but there are kids all over the place being told to some effect this exact sort of stuff. And it eliminates this, feeling of individual agency. Like, it doesn't matter what I do. Now I'm just a kind of political pawn. If I get into a school, it is primarily because of my demographic, because of the demographic that I represent according to them. It has nothing to do with my actual ability, my actual capacity, what I actually want to do, who I am as a person. It very, very easily can slip into that. And again, I don't think that that's what is intended. I don't think that's what people want to be doing, but that is in effect what happens. And that's what I meant by, what I wrote in that piece about feeling erased. I feel, they are doing this for me according to them, but what they're actually doing it at me, because they're not seeing who I am. I vanish the minute that we do this sort of stuff, the minute that we kind of, the main focus is immutable characteristics, and we're just kind of keeping score and making sure the percentages match up in a certain way, right? The people that you're using to do that math with don't matter anymore. They just disappear, and that's awful.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and I think the one of the things that I think about a lot is, I think maybe even you and I have discussed this before, but that's one of the ways that I see, ironically, the concept of white privilege, which is, I agree that exists, but for different reasons than a lot of people do, which is which is namely that these are the things that white kids oftentimes don't have to grow up struggling with. That we don't have to grow up struggling with, am I being chosen for this because of my skin color, or am I being chosen for this because I earned it?
Right.
And again, I'm not naive enough to know that there is no scenario where we shouldn't be trying to figure out ways to level the playing field, even along demographical lines, because that's part of your article essentially, which is that there are real inequity concerns. And where I become concerned about this is again the message that it sends to kids when they're being told these things, and when they're being taught about these things. And another thing, like, so earlier I said I would be fine if you took that final step and made sure everybody knows that you still have to judge people individually, even if you know all this information. But another way, the way I would, qualify it is, if I were in charge of the equity training or whatever it is I would present, right now, when we think about CRT, right, we're always being told, well, if you don't want to do CRT in school, then I guess you don't want to teach the bad history or whatever. Like, no,
Yeah.
I would actually love to teach the bad history, as long as you then say to the kids in the room, we should know about this bad history, but it does not have to determine your future.
Right.
If we would add that explicitly and loudly in this conversation, then I think actually a lot of people would probably not disagree as much about this. I think that's what's missing.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of a straw man when people put that up, because
Mm-hmm.
most people are not like, no, we shouldn't teach that America had slavery. No, I mean, I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there are people out there, and I know that there are people out
Mm-hmm.
there who are like, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. Like, there's a lot of rationalizing going on. There's a lot of craziness. So, granted, yes, that exists, but I think that that's a very, you know, that's a very minor percentage of the population. Most people are like, yeah, no, we absolutely should teach history, but it matters how we do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I want every kid in the world to know what happened. I want every kid to know exactly what happened, right? You kind of temper the detail and brutality of the detail about the brutality, based on you know their age and their readiness to receive and actually process that stuff. But you should always tell the truth, right? The whole thing of Columbus wanted to prove the earth was round. We shouldn't do that. The first Thanksgiving, we shouldn't do it the way that, I grew up being told these things. That's wrong. We shouldn't do that. These are just lies we're telling our children. So we shouldn't do that. But we also should make sure that when we teach these things, first of all, for me at least, it's much more important as time has gone on to indicate the falsehood of race in the first place, right? Race was created at this time for this reason, and it just became the water we swim in. And we need to take a step back and recognize that, and kind of, pop back up to the surface and go, oh, let's divorce ourselves from this concept, intellectually at least. So we should do that as well. But when we teach this history, we have to be careful not to accidentally implant in kids' heads that, you know, this white kid across the table from them is an avatar for that bad history, and that this black kid sitting next to this kid is an avatar for that bad history, right? Is an avatar for everyone or everything that came before them.
Mhm.
That's wrong. That's again erasing individuality. It's erasing this kid. It is not, you know, Jimmy's fault, and it wasn't his idea. He never came up with any of this stuff, right? So to kind of, it's this weird kind of blood libel thing that happens that's really gross, and people just kind of like accept it as, you know, oh yeah, you guys did this to us. There is no you guys and us. Like you're not doing that right now. There's a person across the, you know, across the screen or whatever from you. It's a totally different dynamic. It's so easy for us to fall into that kind of, you know, sports sort of thing where it's like, oh, we kicked your ass last year. You didn't do anything, dude. You sat on the couch. You don't play football. You know what I mean? And that's important. Like, you didn't do that. You know, so it's in a positive and a negative way. Like, you know, inheriting victimhood is not a good idea. And inheriting guilt over, you know, the sins of your fathers is also not a good idea. We can't do that. So
yeah, no,
both sides.
yeah, that's great. One of the things that I think also plays into this is that it is in, I'm glad you used the sports analogy, because that reminds me that in sports, the concept of merit and even meritocracy is easier to conceptualize, because there are statistics being kept out the wazoo. There are wins and losses. There are wins and losses over time that somebody could use as a pretty objective measure for who is the best team or who is the best player. It's easier to have that conversation because we can objectively mostly all agree on it. Like, yes, people get into really big arguments on Twitter or Facebook or whatever about if is LeBron or Michael or Kobe the best basketball player of all time, and people will argue about it. But it's usually a pretty short list of people that get included in that conversation. It's not like, you know, if I take this into my classical music world, and if you started to have an argument about which are the best choirs in the world, or which are the best opera singers in the world, or which are the best violin players in the world, you'd have to go down a list of 40 or 50 or 60 people or groups or whatever, because the criteria are so subjective. And in other realms, this is true as well. And so if we're talking about schooling with kids that are learning to be writers or learning to be journalists or poets or painters or whatever, these are all, we don't have a super clear set of objective criteria for what even constitutes merit in those areas. And so because people find it difficult to have the conversation, they've just decided to not have merit. In other words, because I can't clearly define what is excellent, I just have decided to not believe that excellence exists.
Right. Yeah. It's a quick fix. It's a kind of, you know, my brother says it's like a Band-Aid over the tumor problem. Right. So there are a lot of good analogies here, but like I haven't thought through the basketball one or the sports one. But it's interesting because in the context of football, right, we understand what the rules are, we understand what the standards are, and we understand what it takes for people to meet the standards. If a person doesn't score a touchdown, they don't score a touchdown, right? We have refs to decide on those edge cases. But if they don't make it to the end zone, they don't make it to the end zone, right? And that just is what it is. So that's a perfect meritocracy, right? If you look at it just on that level. But then think about, well, who gets to play? And why do they get to play? Who gets to play are people who are extremely athletic and talented at this particular set of skills, right? People who are in the right place at the right time, people who got the right training, people who got the right schooling, people who got the right equipment,
nutrition,
people who got the right coaching, nutrition, exactly. All of these factors play a part into just the baseline of who even gets to step onto the field, right?
Yeah.
And everyone who doesn't get to step onto the field, we're not even thinking about in this context, because in this context, they don't matter, right? So now we have this perfect meritocracy, but the meritocracy is in a box and it has to stay in that box, because if you open the box up, everything gets screwed up. If we just let anybody play NFL football that feels like playing NFL football, the games are going to suck. It's going to be a disaster. People are going to get hurt, right? All these terrible things will happen because we've screwed up the strict structure that is necessary to make it work, to make the meritocracy work in that context. Now, if you try to graph that onto society as a whole, right? People with certain skills are automatically going to be more successful. People who are charming, people who are good looking, people who are tall, people who have or just happen to be born to the right parents, who maybe have give donations to the right schools, right? Have enough money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Got lucky with investments and are now independently wealthy, right? All those things play a part. Where a kid goes to school, right? So there's a huge difference between a public school in the South Bronx and a public school in Westchester, New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or South Central LA and Beverly Hills, right? Just the regular public school. They're going to be drastically different and noticeably different, right? From outer space, you could probably tell the difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's going to matter. And what again? We talked a little bit about the culture thing, but what kids are taught at home matters, right?
Yeah.
Now there are a million different things. There's no, some things are not practically good to teach, and other things are definitely practically good to teach. And there's a whole range of stuff in between there, right? But I mean, what is culture if not a strategy for getting ahead, right? That's what a culture is. It's these are our norms, these are our customs, these are the things that carry on into the next generation, and they're beneficial for XYZ reasons.
Right.
And
Yeah.
part of those reasons is success,
And
right?
culture helps people learn how to get ahead or how to be successful, but it
Right.
usually only works within that culture. So they're built in a context. And of course, our challenge in the United States is that we have a lot of cultures operating side by side. And so that's where, again, I want to be super clear with like the concept of culturally responsive education. I'm fully on board with that as long as it doesn't get conflated with skin color.
Right.
That there are differences there, because we should, as teachers, recognize that there are. In fact, I had a conversation recently on the show with my good friend Maria, who grew up in inner city St. Louis and is currently teaching there. And we talked at length about, just her culture growing up in a Black church, for example, is that it's loud and people holler out and they, do all kinds of things that if you walked into a white church and behaved that way, you would be looked at as rude.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no inherent better or worse in either of those environments, but when they mix, people don't know how to deal with that. And that comes into classrooms too. Students come into classrooms with a different set of expectations from their culture of what is appropriate and different ways to speak to an adult or a teacher or whatever. And I think it is good that teachers are being taught more recently to be responsive and patient with those types of things, and even being aware, learning what those other cultures are. But I think where we fall short is when we start to say, well, those are reasons why a kid can't do.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we turn left, and where we should turn right, which is
Yeah.
essentially that no, I'm going to recognize that these cultural differences are there so that I can make sure the kid can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like that I think because maybe my way of thinking about this is just harder. We don't
It
want
is.
to do it. Like that makes
Yeah.
my job harder.
Yeah. 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 I think that's exactly the problem, is that it's less sexy. It's much more long term. So another thing that I try to get into in the piece, there are word count limitations, but I try to get into this, and I've talked about this before, that I'm so much more concerned with the floor than I am with the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the discourse now seems to be obsessed about the ceiling. Is I want to lower the ceiling for these people so that it's just as high as the ceiling for these people, or that's all it's that sort of thing. Like I want to take things away from you so that I can give them to somebody else, when all I care about is, for example, getting back to like the football analogy, people who don't get to play football because they just don't meet the standard, we don't just let them to like starve and rot, right? Imagine that like our entire society is football. Our entire society is football games, and the only people who succeed are people who are really good at football and can make it to the end zone, get the touchdown, all that stuff. People who are not good at football, people who are born short and they don't weigh 250 pounds and they're not just masses of muscle, they're not super athletic, they don't have those talents. Like I don't have those talents, right? I can't throw a football for shit. Uh, I shouldn't just be like abandoned, right? It shouldn't be like, well, you should learn how to play football, right? That's kind of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of mentality of,
Yeah.
oh,
Well,
learn how to play football, man.
yeah.
You
Well, to
know?
keep your football analogy going, let's take it to the next step, because
Right.
right now the zeitgeist of the world is then the answer is we need to cancel football.
Exactly. And that's
Eh,
crazy
but
because
but as a teacher, I would
right.
rather say, okay, I've got a kid who can't play football.
Mhm.
I don't want him to get left behind. I want to help him figure out what his game is.
Right. Exactly.
What game would he be good at? Maybe he's a tennis player.
Right.
And but by the way, I'm going to be also teaching him that there is merit in tennis. That you
Exactly.
have to be good at tennis, though. Like, we're not just going to choose tennis and then you're going to go flopping your wrist around, hoping to be, but hoping to be paid someday to be a tennis player. No, your football's not your game, but tennis is, and you're gonna follow the same set of rigor and discipline and practice and study and all of those things, but it's just going to be towards tennis instead of football.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly where I was headed. So, if like keeping with the analogy, like we are in a predominantly football context. We are in a society that football is number one, number two, number three, number four. Maybe there's a number five, but we don't even care, right? It's all that matters is if you're good at football. And what we need to do is open it up to more sports, right? We need to have tennis and baseball and soccer and swimming, and because people are different and people have different capacities, and we should try to cultivate that because it's to our benefit. It's to
Mhm.
our overall benefit that more success happens in more different ways. So we should have a variety of avenues to success. Not everyone should go to Harvard, right? And I feel like part of the problem is we see Harvard as the only path, and so we're just going to make sure to put everyone on that path and make sure that they get there. Right. And maybe they don't need to. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe that's not the best thing for them.
Mhm.
Not to say that, oh, they're too dumb, they can't make it. It's just not everyone is interested in the exact same things. Not everyone is going to succeed in the same way as other things, right? Not everyone's going to be a surgeon, right? So we should have other routes to success. We should value those. And we should handle the floor. We should make it so that we are the wealthiest, most prosperous society in human history, right? We're certainly the richest country in the world. We can make it so that there is a baseline beneath we just do not allow anyone to live, right? There are basic needs that we can agree on, that we just guarantee to everybody because it's in our best interest for everyone to have the opportunity to succeed in the way that they will succeed. And it shouldn't be that you have to become a lawyer or a doctor or those kind of prestige positions in order to have a good life, in order to have the bare minimum,
Mhm.
right? So I think that's the problem with the meritocracy kind of myth, the myth of the system, is that all these people fall through the cracks because they just are unlucky enough to have skills and talents that don't necessarily graft onto football, right? Our football context.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you can't play football, I don't care about you. If you can't play football, you better learn or tough luck. As though someone can just decide to suddenly be 6'5" and 300 pounds
Right.
and super fast, right? You can't just decide to do that. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, there's actually, I think, good news on that topic. It's just that nobody ever talks about it, which is that right now,
Mhm.
because of our focus on Harvard, or focus on football, so to speak, societally,
Right.
there have been
Yeah.
quietly growing a group of people who have been playing baseball and making a crap ton of money the whole time. So
Right.
I'm going to let the metaphor drop. And of course, what I'm talking about is people who have figured out that because we've been pushing so many kids, so many round pegs into square holes towards Harvard, that we have a
Mhm.
massive degree inflation problem, where higher education is too expensive. Too many people have the degrees, and they go to these schools and end up without being able to get jobs that can pay off their student loans. And meanwhile, there are people graduating from high school and learning a trade and making $200,000 with no student debt by the time they're 28.
Yep.
And that is a growing group of people. And so I do actually see that as good news broadly, because for exactly what you just said, which is that not everyone is cut out for every single type of thing. It's just that we have been, as a society, and this comes from higher education and comes from education, in my opinion, been telling people for so long that Harvard is the only thing that we will value. Football is the only thing we value. So I don't care if you're a plumber who makes 250 grand a year because you own your own plumbing business and have no debt. You are still not as successful in my eyes because you don't have that degree.
Right. There's a social kind of prestige to certain things.
Yes.
that isn't given to other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, maybe the pandemic will, or at least it can, help us recontextualize that sort of stuff. Because think about all the people that we started calling essential workers. They are, generally speaking, all the people you ignore, all the people you look down on, all the people you don't care about or think about the minute they're out of your sight, right? The cashiers and the delivery drivers and all these people who, while the rest of us were able to sit at home safe and, relatively not inconvenienced, right? They had to go out and keep the world running for us so that we can do that. And, my whole thing is, even after this pandemic is long over, we should still call them essential. We should make sure to categorize who they are and what they do in that way, because that'll change the way we look at them. It'll change the way we talk about them. So the plumber suddenly becomes your savior. The plumber is Superman, because, man, if your toilet doesn't work, it doesn't matter how nice your house is, right? It doesn't matter how nice your house is when you can't go out because there's a pandemic. And, your delivery driver, that's another superhero, because if you can't get your nice little box so that you can, your Blue Apron box so that you can make your dinner at home and be all safe and sound and cozy and free of COVID, you're screwed, right? You need these people. We need these people. And I think that our values have been skewed by this kind of rat race. And that's another thing, is it shouldn't be a rat race, right? There are certain things that should just be guaranteed because it's for everyone's benefit. So, like the public school in South Central should be just as good as the public school in Beverly Hills, because there are kids there who we need to teach, who are going to grow up into adults that are going to go out and do things in the world. Wouldn't you want them to be fully prepared to do great things? Wouldn't you want them to be fully prepared to create and innovate and succeed and prosper? Because, if we have 10 kids who create the equivalent of an Amazon, whereas we used to only have one, that's better. That's better for everybody. Yeah. So it's interesting, because it seems like, kind of getting back to the left-right sort of push and pull on this thing is there's so much concern about, like, I'm not giving people handouts. I'm not, you have to get by on your own steam and stuff. But those people are also very kind of business minded, and they're all about investing and, making the right moves. Like, these are great moves to make. Investing in your fellow citizen is a great move to make. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in yourself. Who knows what this person's going to invent or create or do that's going to benefit your life somehow. We're all in this together, man, Yeah.
And I think we'll wrap this up here in a little bit, but my final thought on this is that as a teacher, whenever I see these arguments happening online, and this is, I guess, fits within the culture war realm, this conversation. But I just keep coming back to my knowledge of, and I would, without being ashamed to flex, I consider myself an expert. I've taught 2,500 kids in my life, and I've seen my sample size is pretty large for what works and what doesn't work in terms of motivating kids and teaching them to be successful and driven. And the thing that works the worst, the thing that you would never, ever, ever do in a classroom, is start to list for kids on a regular basis all of the reasons they can't.
Right.
And I think that culturally, I don't think we're doing it on purpose. And maybe in some cases there are, but I think the kids are seeing those messages so frequently that they are starting to believe it. And that is my concern. is,
Yeah.
if I want to guarantee that my kids will not learn how to read music, for example, I would start class every day by explaining all the challenges about reading music and why it's so hard. But I don't do that. I explain all the steps that it takes to learn how to read music.
Right.
And then we just go through those steps one at a time until it happens. And I tell them that I believe in them, and I tell them that, yes, I know this is hard, but look how far you've come, and look where you could get in the next 3 months. You're always teaching them that they can. It's the little engine that could thing. And I think right now our culture is telling them that not only the little engine can't, but that the whole train's broken. So we
Right.
should just stop trying.
Right. Yeah. Just get rid of the tracks and let's not even go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's remember that these are individual human beings with individual ideas and aspirations, and people, I think one of the reasons that I'm so sympathetic to this, or at least that it sticks out to me, is because I was the kid who fell through the cracks, depending on how you're looking at me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, both my parents are from the Dominican Republic, but that tells you almost nothing about who I am, what I care about, how I think, what my opinion is on anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you assume, right, if you assume things, you're going to miss out on getting to know me, the person. I'm a single human being, right? And yeah, maybe you can generalize certain things, like I'm gonna like certain food, maybe not. I'm gonna like certain music, maybe not, right? Like stereotypes are by definition kind of, they're blunt, right? They're imprecise. That is the point of them, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can generalize to an extent and get by to an extent, but you're missing so much. And think about it from the other perspective as well. Think about a kid not being seen for who they are and just having this thing projected onto them. And then when they're at this impressionable age where they're trying to figure themselves out, they're trying to figure out who they are, they're trying to understand how they fit into the world, and you're projecting this kind of idea on them, they're in danger of just kind of grafting themselves into that projection and just becoming the projection and
Mm-hmm.
never evolving or growing into the person that they could have become, right? They just become this avatar for your political ideas. They just become this kind of pawn that you're moving around a board instead of a person. So in both directions, it sucks, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I share a lot of your concerns. Obviously, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, man.
And
Thank you very much.
yeah, and I think we just got to keep plugging away at trying to convince people that they can care about all these things that they care about, in inequalities and inequities and all the different things they can. You can still care about those things,
Yeah.
but there's the way we communicate it is critical.
Yeah. We
This,
should care about them
yeah.
because they're real. Society is not fair. The structures are not fair. History has not been equally kind to everyone. And there are people who are starting the race way further behind. But we can do things to fix that.
Mhm.
Pretending the race doesn't exist, pretending the race doesn't matter, that doesn't help anybody, especially not them. They're already behind. And now you're telling them that the thing they're struggling to do doesn't even matter. That's only going to cripple them further.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another one of my pet peeves. I'll finish. I guess I promise I'll finish. Um,
It's all good.
but it is that just because you say you care about those things and you propose a solution in the name of caring about those things doesn't eliminate the possibility that you could make that thing worse.
Yes.
And people don't lack the humility to turn that around on themselves and say, okay, I care about this, I genuinely do, so that must mean that everything I like, rainbows just fly out of my ass when I talk. Like it could be that I, with good intentions, I could be causing the problem to exacerbate. And I think right now that's another thing that's just really missing from the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what hopefully, the star manning approach uh can do is, is because it begins with connecting with that initial impetus. It's like, look, I know that you're seeing this problem and that everything you're doing is with the intention of fixing that problem. I see the problem too, and I also want to fix it. But here's where I'm seeing your strategy not working.
Yeah.
So how can we figure out a better one so that we can solve the problem we're both looking at, right? And now, what I've been saying lately is we switch from, us, them, me, you language to we language, right? Like I just did the switch right there. It's like, look, I know you're trying to do this. I see that too. How can we figure out a better way? Now we're together. So now we avoid that whole thing of, oh, you just don't want to teach history. Oh, you don't care about this group of people. No, I explicitly do. I very much care. And I'm with you. But here's the issue. How can we fix this? So now we're together.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's got to be together. Yeah. Well, Angel, thanks for hanging out with me.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for sticking around to the end of the conversation. I really appreciate Angel's time, and I appreciate you listening and thinking through some of these ideas. And maybe we hit a nerve for you. Maybe we hit on some things that you don't quite agree with, and that's okay. I want to hear from you. Jump on the Coralosopher's Facebook page and let's talk about it. Send me an email, coralosophy@gmail.com, or you can respond directly on coralosophy.com on the main page and leave your thoughts in the Google form right there on the page. And of course, there are ways that you can help support the show. This is a listener-supported show. Head over to the sponsors. That's sitereadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, vocevista.com for your resonance imaging software. If you need some sheet music, head over to ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. And of course, like, share, leave comments, leave ratings. Even if you don't like the show, leave a bad rating, but leave a rating. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone.